What he saw made his blood run cold. Their world was destroyed in an instant. But the question is, who was the man tearing their relationship apart, and why? When the secret was revealed, everything changed in a single moment, and the next move brought him dangerously close to death. One person's life-altering choice and a hidden secret, everything will be exposed at the right moment.
The message arrived at 11:47 p.m., glowing softly on the cracked screen of his phone. He wasn't snooping. He never had. The phone lay face up on the kitchen counter, vibrating once, then again, as if insisting on being noticed. He glanced down out of habit, expecting nothing more than a bill reminder or a group chat notification. Instead, a name appeared that didn't belong to him, paired with a heart emoji that made his chest tighten instantly. For a moment, he did nothing. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. He told himself there had to be an explanation, something harmless, something he was misreading. He picked up the phone, thumb hovering, already afraid of what confirmation would do to him. When he opened the message thread, there was no context to soften the blow, just a single line, explicit and intimate, promising what would happen the next time they were alone. His hands began to shake. Images formed without permission, sharp and cruel. He thought of their child asleep in the other room, of the fragile truce he believed they were rebuilding. Arguments had been frequent, love strained thin, but he had convinced himself they were surviving. The message suggested they had already moved on, at least she had. He scrolled up. That was the mistake. The conversation stretched back weeks, maybe months, filled with coded jokes, late-night plans, and casual affection that felt rehearsed. This wasn't a slip, it was a parallel life. Each line rewrote memories he thought were real. Nights she claimed to be tired, mornings she left early. All of it rearranged itself into something uglier. He sat down slowly, phone clutched in his hand like evidence from a crime scene. Anger came next, hot and disorienting, followed by humiliation so deep it made him nauseous. He wondered how long everyone else had known. He wondered if the other man knew about him, about the child, about the life quietly unraveling. The phone buzzed again, another message, shorter this time, careless, confident. It confirmed what his mind was still resisting. This wasn't ending, it was ongoing. He locked the screen, heart pounding so hard it hurt, and stared at the dark window above the sink, seeing only his own reflection fractured by doubt. He could confront her, he could scream, demand answers, break what little peace remained. Instead, an unfamiliar calm settled over him. A colder instinct whispered that truth didn't always come from questions. Sometimes it came from watching. He grabbed his keys, slipped on his jacket, and left the apartment without making a sound, unaware that this choice would place him on a path that violence was already waiting to finish. Outside, the night was quiet, almost indifferent, streetlights humming as if nothing had changed. He paused beside his car, replaying the message again and again, letting it harden inside him. Somewhere across the city, she was laughing with someone else, unaware he now knew where lies led. He didn't know the address yet, didn't know the man's name, but he knew one thing clearly. He was going to see it for himself, and once he did, there would be no turning back. The decision felt final, heavy, irreversible, like crossing a line he could never uncross in the dark ahead. He drove without music, the city sliding past like a blur he couldn't focus on. Every red light felt like an accusation, every green one a push forward he couldn't stop. The address formed slowly in his mind, pieced together from old excuses, familiar streets she mentioned too casually, patterns he had ignored because trust was easier than doubt. When he finally parked, his hands were stiff on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, breath shallow. The building was older than he expected, concrete stained by time, a single stairwell lit by a flickering bulb. No security guard, no cameras he could see, just quiet, too quiet. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing louder than it should have. With every floor, his chest tightened, not from the climb, but from the certainty settling in his bones. He stopped outside the apartment door, heart pounding hard enough to feel in his throat. Voices drifted through the thin wood, a man's laugh, familiar, soft laughter he knew too well answering it. His hand hovered inches from the handle. He told himself he would just listen, just confirm. The door, unbelievably, was slightly open. Inside, the air smelled wrong, not home, not theirs. A mix of cologne and something sweet. The living room lights were dim, shadows stretched across the walls like they were trying to hide. He stayed still, pressed against the hallway, afraid that even breathing might announce him. The voices grew clearer, casual, intimate, stripped of guilt. He saw them without meaning to. The angle was cruelly perfect. Her shoes by the couch, a jacket that wasn't his tossed over a chair. She was comfortable here, relaxed in a way she hadn't been in months. The man beside her moved with confidence, like someone who knew he belonged. They touched easily, without hesitation. His stomach twisted. This wasn't a mistake caught mid-act. This was routine. He felt invisible, erased from his own life. Memories crashed together violently. Birthdays, late nights, promises whispered in the dark. All of it felt counterfeit now, like props in a story he never controlled. A sound escaped him before he could stop it. Barely a breath, but enough. Her head snapped up first. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second that stretched endlessly. Shock flickered across her face, quickly buried under something colder. The man turned next, slow and deliberate, studying the hallway like a hunter confirming a target. No one spoke. The silence screamed louder than any argument could have. He should have run. Every instinct told him to leave, to protect whatever dignity he had left. Instead, his feet felt rooted, his body frozen between rage and disbelief. The man stood, adjusting his shirt with calm precision. There was no panic in his movements, no rush, just control. He took a step closer, eyes locked forward, not at her, but at the shadow in the hallway, at him. "You're not supposed to be here," the man said quietly. The words landed like a threat, not a statement. She said nothing. She didn't reach for him. She didn't explain. Her silence felt heavier than betrayal itself. The man moved closer, close enough now that the boyfriend could see the faint scar near his jaw, the unreadable expression in his eyes. In that moment, he understood something chilling. This wasn't just an affair he had stumbled upon. He had interrupted something far more dangerous. And somewhere deep in his gut, he felt the certainty that the man standing in front of him already knew exactly who he was.
The man didn't rush the moment. He let it stretch, heavy and deliberate, as if silence itself worked in his favor. Up close, he looked older than the boyfriend had expected, not by years, but by experience. His eyes were steady, observant, measuring damage before deciding how much more to cause. He glanced briefly toward her, not for reassurance, but confirmation. Whatever passed between them needed no words. "You should go," the man said calmly, voice low, controlled. It wasn't a suggestion, it was instruction. The boyfriend swallowed, forcing himself to speak through the pounding in his chest. "You don't get to tell me where to go." His voice sounded smaller than he intended, swallowed by the unfamiliar room and the man's certainty. He looked at her then, searching for something. Regret, fear, love. He found none of it. She stood frozen, arms crossed, eyes distant, as if already rehearsing a version of this night where she was the victim. The man smiled slightly, not amused, but assured. I get to tell you because you walked into something that isn't yours anymore." He stepped aside just enough to block the exit behind him, a subtle move that sent a warning through the boyfriend's spine. "And because you don't understand what you're standing in." Anger flared, sharp and reckless. "You're sleeping with my kid's mother," the boyfriend said. "You think that makes this yours?" His hands trembled, fists clenched at his sides. Every instinct screamed to hit something, to break the calm that mocked him. The man's expression hardened. "I think," he replied evenly, "that you don't know who she is or who I am." He glanced again toward her, eyes narrowing slightly. "And that ignorance is the only reason you're still breathing comfortably." That was when fear slipped in, cold and unwelcome. Not fear of losing her, he had already lost that, but fear of the man in front of him. There was no jealousy here, no desperation, just control. The boyfriend realized suddenly that he wasn't interrupting a secret romance, he was intruding on an arrangement. She finally spoke, voice tight. "Please," she said, but it wasn't directed at him, it was for the man. "Not here." The man raised a hand without looking at her, silencing her instantly. The gesture was practiced, familiar. The boyfriend noticed how she shrank back, how quickly she obeyed. A realization formed, dark and nauseating. This wasn't equal. Whatever power existed in this room didn't belong to her. "You should have stayed away," the man continued. "People get hurt when they can't accept being replaced." His gaze sharpened, especially men who confuse loyalty with ownership. The boyfriend took a step forward before thinking, rage overriding sense. "You don't get to rewrite my life." The words echoed uselessly. He stopped when the man's demeanor shifted, calm peeling back to reveal something harder underneath. The man leaned in close, voice barely above a whisper. "Listen carefully. You go home. You take care of your child. You forget this place exists." His eyes bored into him, "because if you don't, this won't end with hurt feelings." For the first time, the boyfriend saw it clearly. The confidence wasn't arrogance, it was experience. This man had ended things before, people before. The man stepped aside, opening a path to the door, a choice disguised as mercy. As the boyfriend moved past him, the man added quietly, "Let it go." The words followed him down the stairs, clinging like a warning. Outside, the night air felt sharp against his skin. He sat in his car, shaking, replaying every second. He didn't notice the second car parked across the street, engine running, headlights off. But someone else noticed him leaving. I drove back home with his hands still shaking, the man's warning replaying like a bruise that darkened every time he touched it. She was waiting, sitting on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, face already prepared. She didn't ask where he'd been, she just looked at him like someone measuring damage. He stood there, jacket still on, realizing she'd known this conversation was coming. "You scared me," she said, voice trembling just enough to feel real. "You can't just disappear." It was almost convincing. He told her what he'd seen. He watched her eyes change, the panic flickering before control snapped back into place. She cried, quietly, carefully, like someone who'd practiced. She blamed loneliness, pressure, him. She said he was never there, never listening, never enough. Each word cut, not because it was true, but because it almost was. She stepped closer, touched his arm, then pulled away as if afraid. "I made a mistake," she whispered, "but you're the one I love." He wanted to believe her. That was the most dangerous part. Love twisted into a weapon, sharpened by guilt and memory. She reminded him of their child, of nights they'd survived, of promises spoken when everything felt possible. But something had shifted. He noticed how she avoided his eyes, how her phone never left her hand. He remembered the way the other man silenced her with a gesture. The pieces aligned, forming a picture that made his stomach sink. She wasn't protecting her heart, she was managing risk. When he asked about the man, her answer was careful, vague, empty. "It's over," she said. "You don't need to worry." The lie sat between them, heavy and unspoken. He felt foolish, then angry, then tired. Trust cracked, but she pressed harder, framing herself as fragile, him as reckless. By morning, he apologized without knowing why. Later, alone in the dark, he replayed the night again. Her words echoed, not comforting, but strategic. Love wasn't healing him, it was blinding him. His phone vibrated, a new message, not from her, no name, just coordinates and a time. Below it, one line, "We warned you." He stared at the screen, heart sinking. Outside, a car door closed softly. Someone was already nearby, watching the apartment. The truth was tightening around him, and love had led him straight into its path. He sat still, listening to every sound, the refrigerator's hum, the distant traffic, his own breathing. Fear crept in quietly, wearing the mask of logic. He told himself it was coincidence, intimidation, nothing real. Yet his body knew better. Muscles stayed tight, senses sharpened. He checked the locks, the windows, the hallway light. From the bedroom, she called his name, soft, almost loving. He didn't answer. In the silence, he admitted the truth he'd avoided. Love had kept him compliant, predictable. It had made him easy to corner. Whoever stood behind the message understood that. He looked again at the coordinates, memorizing them, hating that curiosity burned brighter than fear. Tomorrow, he would pretend everything was normal. He would hold his child, listen to her apologies, play his role. But something he knew he wouldn't forget. The door he'd opened tonight wouldn't close. Somewhere, a man with scars and patience was waiting, and whatever came next would punish him for believing love was protection, not leverage. The night stretched on, heavy with implication. When he finally lay down, sleep never came. His mind kept returning to the unlocked door, the warning, the feeling of being chosen. By dawn, a decision would form, dangerous and inevitable. He would stop watching from the shadows. He would follow the truth, even if it led him straight into the next trap, waiting patiently ahead, just out of sight, loaded and ready. I drove back home with his hands still shaking, the man's warning replaying like a bruise that darkened every time he touched it. She was waiting, sitting on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, face already prepared. She didn't ask where he'd been. She just looked at him like someone measuring damage. He stood there, jacket still on, realizing she'd known this conversation was coming. "You scared me," she said, voice trembling just enough to feel real. "You can't just disappear." It was almost convincing. He told her what he'd seen. He watched her eyes change, the panic flickering before control snapped back into place. She cried, quietly, carefully, like someone who'd practiced. She blamed loneliness, pressure, him. She said he was never there, never listening, never enough. Each word cut, not because it was true, but because it almost was. She stepped closer, touched his arm, then pulled away as if afraid. "I made a mistake," she whispered, "but you're the one I love." He wanted to believe her. That was the most dangerous part. Love twisted into a weapon, sharpened by guilt and memory. She reminded him of their child, of nights they'd survived, of promises spoken when everything felt possible. But something had shifted. He noticed how she avoided his eyes, how her phone never left her hand. He remembered the way the other man silenced her with a gesture. The pieces aligned, forming a picture that made his stomach sink. She wasn't protecting her heart, she was managing risk. When he asked about the man, her answer was careful, vague, empty. "It's over," she said. "You don't need to worry." The lie sat between them, heavy and unspoken. He felt foolish, then angry, then tired. Trust cracked, but she pressed harder, framing herself as fragile, him as reckless. By morning, he apologized without knowing why. Later, alone in the dark, he replayed the night again. Her words echoed, not comforting, but strategic. Love wasn't healing him, it was blinding him. His phone vibrated, a new message, not from her, no name, just coordinates and a time. Below it, one line, "We warned you." He stared at the screen, heart sinking. Outside, a car door closed softly. Someone was already nearby, watching the apartment. The truth was tightening around him, and love had led him straight into its path. He sat still, listening to every sound, the refrigerator's hum, the distant traffic, his own breathing. Fear crept in quietly, wearing the mask of logic. He told himself it was coincidence, intimidation, nothing real. Yet his body knew better. Muscles stayed tight, senses sharpened. He checked the locks, the windows, the hallway light. From the bedroom, she called his name, soft, almost loving. He didn't answer. In the silence, he admitted the truth he'd avoided. Love had kept him compliant, predictable. It had made him easy to corner. Whoever stood behind the message understood that. He looked again at the coordinates, memorizing them, hating that curiosity burned brighter than fear. Tomorrow, he would pretend everything was normal. He would hold his child, listen to her apologies, play his role. But something he knew he wouldn't forget. The door he'd opened tonight wouldn't close. Somewhere, a man with scars and patience was waiting, and whatever came next would punish him for believing love was protection, not leverage. The night stretched on, heavy with implication. When he finally lay down, sleep never came. His mind kept returning to the unlocked door, the warning, the feeling of being chosen. By dawn, a decision would form, dangerous and inevitable. He would stop watching from the shadows. He would follow the truth, even if it led him straight into the next trap, waiting patiently ahead, just out of sight, loaded and ready.
By morning, the decision he'd felt forming had hardened into something colder. He didn't confront her again. He didn't mention the message or the coordinates. He moved through the apartment quietly, watching, listening, cataloging details he once ignored. Every glance she avoided confirmed what he already knew. The truth wasn't hidden, it was layered. When she left with their child, he waited exactly 10 minutes before opening his laptop. He searched carefully, starting with fragments, a nickname she'd slipped once, a business name that didn't exist, a license plate he remembered from the night outside the apartment. The trail was thin but deliberate, like someone used to being searched for. It didn't take long to find the first report, an assault charge from years back, dismissed after a witness recanted. Another incident, another city, another woman. The details were vague, but the pattern was sharp. Violence followed him like a shadow, always close, never proven. Men like that learned how to survive systems meant to stop them. The deeper he went, the more uneasy he felt. Shell companies, cash businesses, addresses that changed every few months. This wasn't recklessness, it was design. The man didn't just hurt people, he erased himself afterward. And somehow she had walked straight into his orbit, or been pulled. He closed the laptop when he heard a car slow outside. The sound lingered longer than traffic should. Through the blinds, he saw the same dark sedan from the night before, parked across the street, engine idling. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. It stayed for several minutes, then drove off without urgency. That was when fear stopped being theoretical. He stepped outside later, telling himself it was paranoia. The street looked ordinary. Neighbors moved between cars. A dog barked somewhere nearby. Still, the feeling followed him, pressing between his shoulders. At the grocery store, he noticed a man 2 aisles away twice. At the intersection near home, the sedan passed again, slow, deliberate. Back inside, he locked the door and leaned against it, breath shallow. He replayed every interaction, every warning, the message, the man's calm threat, the silence she kept. This wasn't about jealousy anymore. It was about control, and he was already inside someone else's game. He considered the police, then dismissed it. What would he say? That he'd found an affair and scared himself with internet searches? That a man with no active warrants felt dangerous? Systems required proof. He had instinct, memory, and fear. And fear, he was learning, was rarely enough to save anyone. The apartment felt smaller as evening settled. Every sound became suspicious, the elevator's hum, voices in the hallway. Even the walls seemed to listen. He realized with a hollow clarity that whatever came next would not be accidental. Someone was shaping events, pushing him forward, waiting to see how he reacted. That night, he searched again, broader this time. He found a name tied to an old civil suit, sealed after settlement. He found a photo from a charity event, the man smiling beside people who looked important, protected, connected, untouchable. The realization settled heavily. The man didn't just have a past, he had insulation, and she, whether willingly or not, was now part of it. Whatever leverage existed ran deeper than love, deeper than threats, deeper than anything he could reach without consequences. Near midnight, his phone vibrated. No message this time, just a missed call from an unknown number. When he tried to call back, it went straight to voicemail. A moment later, headlights swept across the living room wall, slow and searching. He killed the lights and stood still, heart hammering. Outside, a car door closed. Footsteps approached, then stopped. Someone was at his building, and whoever it was knew exactly where he lived. The past had finally found him, breathing outside.
He didn't sleep. He stood by the window until dawn bled into the sky, watching shadows move and disappear. When morning came, nothing happened. No knock, no confrontation. The silence felt intentional, like someone deciding how much pressure to apply. By evening, his nerves were raw, patience gone, fear curdling into anger. She returned late, carrying groceries and excuses. The door closed behind her with a final sound that echoed too loudly. He watched her move through the apartment as if it still belonged to her, humming softly, setting things down. The normalcy was unbearable. "We need to talk," he said. She froze, then sighed, already tired. "Not tonight," she replied. "I've had a long day." "That's funny," he said quietly. "So have I." He told her everything, the searches, the car, the call. He watched her carefully as the words landed. Her face didn't show shock, it showed calculation. She sat down slowly, hands clasped, eyes glossy but dry. "You're scaring yourself," she said. "You always do this. You imagine threats where there aren't any." "You lied," he said, "about him, about everything." Her voice hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." The argument erupted fast, years of resentment breaking through restraint. She accused him of control, of weakness, of never understanding what it meant to survive. He accused her of manipulation, of using love like currency. The words cut deeper because they were aimed, precise, rehearsed. "He protects me," she finally said. The room went silent. "From what?" he asked. She didn't answer. She looked away, jaw tight, as if she'd already said too much. In that moment, the truth clicked into place. The affair hadn't been about desire. It had been about safety, power, escape, and he was the obstacle. A knock interrupted them, sharp, confident, 3 quick strikes. Her face drained of color. Fear real this time, flashed across it. She stood abruptly. "Don't answer that," she whispered. He moved before thinking, rage overriding caution. He opened the door. Two men stood outside. One he recognized instantly, the scar, the calm eyes. The other stayed half a step behind, hand inside his jacket. "Evening," the man said pleasantly. "We need to clear something up." The apartment felt smaller as they stepped inside without waiting for permission. The man glanced around, assessing, then looked at her. "You didn't tell me he'd dig," he said softly. "I handled it," she said quickly. "I was going to." The man smiled thinly. "You should have handled it better." The boyfriend's heart pounded. "Get out," he said. "Now." The man's gaze shifted to him, amused. "This isn't your conversation anymore." He stepped closer, close enough for the boyfriend to smell gun oil beneath cologne. "You were warned," he continued. "You didn't listen." The second man moved toward the door, locking it. The sound clicked like a verdict. Panic surged. The boyfriend backed away, hands raised. "This doesn't have to happen," he said. The man tilted his head. "It already has." A loud crash sounded from the hallway outside, someone shouting, a neighbor dropping something. The distraction broke the moment. The man hesitated, eyes flicking toward the noise. "Not tonight," he muttered. They left as quickly as they'd arrived, the door slamming behind them. The apartment fell silent except for their breathing. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. "I tried to protect us," she said. He stared at the door, understanding finally settling in. This wasn't over. It had just begun, and whatever came next wouldn't be contained by walls or warnings. As he picked up his phone, hands shaking, he knew the next time they came, it wouldn't be to talk. He stepped into the bathroom, splashed water on his face, and caught his reflection shaking back at him. Sirens wailed somewhere far away, indifferent. He realized they had tested boundaries, not crossed them. Tonight was rehearsal. Tomorrow would be performance. He returned to the living room, helped her up, and said nothing. Silence was safer now. Outside, an engine idled briefly, then faded. He memorized the sound, knowing he would hear it again. And time, survival would depend on seconds, not hope.
The night arrived heavier than usual. The city was silent, as if holding its breath, every street lamp casting long, accusatory shadows. He didn't sleep, didn't close his eyes, only waited, senses taut, anticipating the inevitable. Somewhere deep down, he knew this wouldn't end with words or warnings anymore. The calm before the storm stretched unbearably, and every noise became a signal. Footsteps outside the apartment finally broke the stillness. They were deliberate, slow, confident. He froze, heart hammering against his ribs, listening as someone tested the hallway, approaching his door. The lock rattled, and a shadow appeared through the peephole. Panic surged, sharp and immediate. Before he could think, the door burst open. Two figures entered, movements precise, rehearsed. The man he had seen before stepped forward, eyes cold, calculating. Behind him, another silhouette loomed, a weapon glinting faintly under the dim apartment light. Time fractured into slow, unbearable seconds. "Move," the first man said, voice calm, almost polite, but carrying an unshakable authority. He raised the gun. The boyfriend's stomach twisted. He tried to duck, but the hallway was narrow, every step anticipated. The first shot echoed, deafening, splintering wood and silence alike. Pain exploded in his shoulder, sharp and immediate, stealing his breath. He fell back, hitting the floor with a thud that felt impossibly loud. The second shot tore through the air, then another, each one precise, controlled, indifferent. He tried to crawl, to hide, but the apartment offered no sanctuary. 17 times it happened. 17 bullets tore through flesh and bone.
And yet, somewhere in the chaos, he remained conscious. Adrenaline burned hotter than the pain, every nerve screaming. He remembered her face from the night before, her calm, calculated detachment. Did she know this would happen? Had she planned for this? Blood pooled around him, warm and sticky, grounding him to the floor even as the world seemed to tilt. His ears rang, vision blurred. He could barely move, but instinct screamed to survive. Every breath was a battle, every heartbeat a victory. The man approached him once more, gun trained directly, eyes boring into his soul. "This is what happens when you cross lines," he said, almost conversational, almost humane. "Lines you shouldn't have seen." He stepped back, leaving him bleeding, alive and terrified. The attackers left as quickly as they arrived, leaving behind the smell of gunpowder and inevitability. The boyfriend's body trembled uncontrollably. Pain radiated through every limb, a cruel reminder that even survival came at a cost. He crawled toward the bedroom, where he remembered hiding the phone. Each movement was agony, but each was necessary. He needed help, evidence, proof. He dialed 911 with trembling fingers, the line shaking as much as his body. When the dispatcher answered, his voice was barely more than a whisper, broken by pain and disbelief. "Shots, apartment, please." Sirens wove into the night, distant at first, then growing closer. He lay on the floor, eyes fixed on the ceiling, blood dripping, counting the shots in his mind, each one a stark reminder of how fragile life had become. He realized then that surviving wasn't enough. Understanding the attack, the motives, the manipulation, that was the next step. Somewhere beyond the walls, they were still watching. He knew that as surely as he knew his own name. The night had ended, but the story, the danger, was far from over. And in that silence, broken only by sirens and his ragged breathing, he understood one horrifying truth. Those 17 shots were only the beginning.
The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. Every beep of a monitor, every hushed conversation between nurses reminded him that life could pivot on a moment's decision. He lay in the bed, body broken but alive, replaying the shooting over and over in his mind. The paramedics had called it a miracle. He called it survival. But survival wasn't enough, not when the people he trusted were lying. The police arrived hours later, not with urgency, but with methodical detachment. Questions began immediately, a relentless current he had no choice but to navigate. Who had attacked him? Why? Who knew about the coordinates, the messages, the warnings? His voice was hoarse, trembling, but precise. He told them everything he could remember. Her story came next, calm, rehearsed, polished. She had been at home, she said. She had no idea who could have done it. Her eyes were red, but not from tears, only careful calculation. Every detail she provided had small inconsistencies, moments where hesitation betrayed preparation. She couldn't have acted alone, she said, but her timeline shifted slightly with each question. The detectives exchanged glances. They noticed the gaps, the discrepancies. Every question led to a small adjustment in her tale, and every adjustment painted a subtly different picture. The boyfriend realized the truth was being shaped, sculpted to protect someone or something. The question wasn't whether she lied, it was how deep the lie ran and who it was meant to shield. Then the other man's story arrived, quiet, controlled, and eerily confident. He claimed coincidence, misinterpretation, nothing to see here. He never raised his voice. His calmness was more threatening than anger, each word measured to suggest innocence while asserting dominance. The detective's pen scratched across paper, but the boyfriend felt the frustration building. These narratives didn't match. They couldn't, yet authorities had nothing solid to challenge either one. Fragments of the truth clawed at him. He remembered the way the first man had moved in the apartment, precise and calculating. He remembered the gestures that silenced her, the glances that suggested prior knowledge. These small details didn't fit with either account, but he couldn't yet prove them. The frustration gnawed at him. Hours passed in interrogation rooms, the fluorescent lights harsh against his raw skin. Every time he tried to speak about her manipulation, the detectives pressed for proof, and his words felt hollow, like whispers against steel. He realized that survival alone wasn't enough. He needed evidence. He needed confirmation. Otherwise, the story would be rewritten by those skilled in lying. Back in the hospital room, alone for a moment, he thought about the messages, the stalking, the calm assertion of control. Whoever orchestrated this had planned meticulously, and she had played her part. But why? What leverage remained? His mind circled the same question endlessly, unable to land on an answer without risk. Then he noticed it, a subtle discrepancy in her story, a location mentioned earlier that didn't match timestamps on his phone. Small, almost trivial, but undeniable. A thread. He clung to it, knowing it might unravel the carefully constructed facade. The night stretched long, shadows pooling in the corners of the hospital room. The truth was tangled in conflicting stories, each designed to mislead, to confuse, to protect. Yet somewhere beneath the lies, the sequence of events waited to be uncovered. He realized the next step was inevitable. Someone had to face the consequences of the deception, and he knew with a cold certainty that he would follow the trail to its source. Because these stories didn't match, and they never would, unless someone forced them to. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the violence and lies that had taken place. But inside, he prepared himself for the reckoning that was coming, the confrontation that would bring the next chapter of this story into brutal, unavoidable clarity.
Pain lingered long after the sirens faded. His body was battered, bandages tight around wounds that still burned and throbbed, but it was the mind that ached the most. The shooting had left more than bruises. It had left a fracturing of trust, a recalibration of reality. Every shadow, every sudden noise now carried potential danger. Survival, he realized, wasn't just about living through the bullets. It was about adapting, anticipating, and outthinking those who had tried to end him. In the quiet of the hospital room, he traced the sequence of events over and over. 17 shots, each one precise, each one delivered a message. The attackers had known exactly what to target, what would immobilize him without immediately killing him. He had survived by a combination of instinct and luck. That knowledge made him both grateful and furious. Grateful for still being alive, furious that mere chance had dictated his fate. Sleep was impossible. His thoughts looped relentlessly. The message he had found, the apartment, the warning from the man on the side, her silence. Fear had sharpened into obsession. Every minor detail from the past weeks now carried significance. The trajectory of his life had been manipulated in ways he hadn't fully understood until now. Every warning, every subtle threat had been a psychological test. He began journaling. Fragmented notes, diagrams of streets, timelines of events, names, numbers, observations, even minor coincidences, all recorded. It was a way to impose order on chaos, to create a map that his mind could trust. The act itself was soothing, a small reclaiming of control in a reality designed to strip it away. The doctors spoke to him, their voices clinical, distant. They didn't understand what it meant to survive a targeted attack. They treated wounds, stitched flesh, prescribed painkillers. But he needed more than physical healing. He needed to understand the predators who had orchestrated his near death. He needed insight into their psychology, their patterns, their motives. Understanding, he realized, was the only armor that could protect him moving forward. His thoughts returned to her. The baby mama, her calm, practiced responses, her ability to manipulate situations to her advantage. She had been more than a bystander. She had been an instrument. Each interaction with her now felt like a puzzle he had to solve. She was not just a partner, not just a lover, but a variable in the calculations of danger surrounding him. Weeks passed in a haze of therapy, police interviews, and meticulous note-taking. He learned to read people more carefully, to notice micro-expressions, to detect shifts in tone that revealed intent. Every new interaction was a test, and he could no longer afford to fail. Survival required vigilance, patience, and a cold dispassion he had never known he possessed. One night, while reviewing his notes, he noticed a pattern that chilled him. Locations, times, and interactions suggested a calculated plan extending beyond the immediate attack. Whoever had targeted him had thought several steps ahead. He realized that his survival had been partially planned to prove a point, to warn, to control. In that quiet realization, something hard and resolute formed inside him. He would not remain a passive participant. Survival alone was no longer enough. He had to anticipate, understand, and strike before danger found him again. The body could heal. The mind had to become a weapon. As he looked out the window at the city lights, he understood clearly. The attackers were still out there, the lies were still unfolding, and the next move would be deadly. But now, he was ready, not just to survive, but to fight back. And when the time came, he would use everything he had learned, every scar, every lesson, every ounce of understanding, to confront the threat head-on. The path ahead was dangerous, uncertain, and unforgiving, but it was now his to navigate, and navigating it successfully would demand more than courage. It would demand the full, unrelenting psychology of survival.
The city outside moved on, indifferent, as if unaware that the life of one man had been shredded and rewritten in shadows. Inside, he sat in silence, the aftermath of the attack settling like dust in the corners of the apartment. His body was healing, but his mind was sharper than ever. He had learned to see beneath the surface, to notice the invisible strings that had been pulling at him for weeks. Now he understood something terrifying. The truth, once uncovered, was far more dangerous than any lie that had kept him blind. He pulled out his notes again, timelines carefully annotated, names connected by invisible threads, locations marked and cross-referenced. Each piece of evidence fit together with growing clarity. The affair, the warnings, the stalking, the shooting, it was all part of a single deliberate design. Someone had orchestrated everything, manipulating not just him, but her, the city, even the authorities. And now that he could see the full pattern, he realized he was only just beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had survived. She entered the apartment, quiet, tentative, as if weighing every step. Her eyes met his, searching for signs of forgiveness or perhaps weakness. He didn't flinch. "We need to be honest," he said. His voice was low, deliberate. "No more hiding, no more lies." She hesitated, then spoke, carefully choosing words. "I've told you everything I can. I thought I was protecting you, protecting us." Her voice faltered. "I didn't know what he would do." He listened, parsing every nuance. There were truths in her confession, but only partial ones. She revealed enough to start untangling the web, but withheld details that he now realized were critical. Her silence was a weapon, subtle but powerful, and he understood that any truth extracted too soon could shatter everything further. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Uncovering the truth was dangerous not only because of what it revealed, but because of what it would trigger. There were people counting on ignorance, on his confusion, on the belief that everything had been random. Revealing the full story could provoke retaliation, not just against him, but against her, against their child, against anyone connected. He felt the weight of responsibility settle in his chest. Knowledge had become a liability, and he had to wield it carefully. He reviewed the surveillance footage, comparing it with timelines, with her movements, with his own memory. Each anomaly, each subtle inconsistency pointed toward a single conclusion. Someone had engineered every interaction to test him, to see how far he would go, and in doing so, they had underestimated him. Night fell. Shadows stretched across the walls, mirroring the tension in his mind. He realized that confronting the full truth would demand precision, patience, and nerves as steady as steel. One wrong move could reignite the violence, unleash consequences that could not be contained. And yet, the truth had to come out. To survive, to reclaim control, to understand the stakes fully, he had no choice. He looked at her, and for the first time since discovering the betrayal, saw her clearly, not as a lover, not as a mother, but as a participant in a dangerous game. He knew that the next steps they took together would be deliberate, calculated, and fraught with risk. Every decision had to account for retaliation, deception, and leverage. Outside, a car passed slowly, engine humming, headlights briefly illuminating the living room. He stiffened, alert, muscles coiled. Someone was still watching. The truth would not wait. And when it came, it would demand more courage, more strategy, and more ruthlessness than anything he had endured so far. He returned to his notes, laying out the path forward. The lies were comfortable, safe in their obscurity. The truth was perilous, but it was the only way to reclaim control. And he understood, finally, that surviving the bullets was only the beginning. Surviving the truth would be far harder. Somewhere beyond the walls, the game continued, and he was ready to play, to navigate the shadows, confront betrayal, and force the full story into the open, no matter the cost.
The morning light fell harshly across the bedroom, cutting through the blinds and catching the dust that hung in the air. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in his hands, the weight of weeks pressing down on him. Every message, every warning, every inconsistency in her story now converged into a single, undeniable fact. He knew. He had pieced it together. The betrayal, the manipulation, the danger, they were all real. And now there was no hiding from it. She stirred beside him, unaware, or pretending to be unaware that the truth had arrived. Her hand reached for his shoulder, gentle, tentative, as if testing the waters. "You look tired," she said softly, voice careful, measured. But he didn't move, didn't respond. The lies she had built around them had crumbled silently in his mind, leaving only fragments that didn't fit, threads he had begun to unravel. "I know," he said finally, voice low, steady, carrying the weight of revelation. She froze, eyes wide, searching his face for something. Anger, forgiveness, denial? None of it was there, just certainty. "I know about him, about everything." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her calm veneer faltered, tiny cracks forming along the edges of her composure. She tried to speak, but no words came immediately. Her mind raced, calculating what to say, how to explain, how to spin the narrative into something survivable. But for once, her rehearsed stories failed. He wasn't listening for excuses. He was listening for truth. He stood and moved toward the living room, gesturing for her to follow. She obeyed reluctantly, as she always had when control shifted subtly away from her. The apartment, once familiar, now felt like a cage, each shadow a reminder of the nights of fear, the threats, the bullets that had almost ended him. Every detail of the past weeks, the messages, the stalking, the attacks, pressed against him with clarity. "I should have known," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "I missed the signs, the
patterns. I thought love could protect us. I was wrong." Her lips parted, a soundless gasp escaping as she realized that he had seen it all, connected the pieces, understood what she had done. And yet, he didn't scream, didn't lash out. His calmness carried a weight far heavier than any anger could. It was the weight of knowledge, of survival, of a man who had faced death and betrayal and now stood beyond both. She stepped closer, tentative, voice trembling. "I tried to keep you safe." "You kept yourself safe. Not me, not our child, yourself." The words hit like a hammer. They weren't accusations, they were facts. And facts, finally recognized, demanded acknowledgement. He picked up his phone, flipping through notes, timelines, and connections he had meticulously documented. Every inconsistency she had tried to hide was laid bare. Every manipulation, every lie, traced with precision. She watched, silent, as the reality of exposure settled over her. "This changes everything," he said, eyes fixed on hers. "Nothing will be the same. I can't pretend anymore. I won't pretend anymore." A long silence filled the room. Outside, the city continued as if unaware, but inside, the calm had shattered. A decision had been made. The husband knew. The protector had awakened. And somewhere deep in the back of his mind, he realized that the danger was far from over. It had only begun. The story of betrayal, manipulation, and survival had reached its tipping point, and now nothing, no lie, no manipulation, could undo the consequences that would follow.